Chris, did you change the Netflix password?
No, why?
It's saying something about household restrictions.
Ooh,
The
busted.
audacity. Oops. Yeah. And they just raised the cost. Unsubscribe. I'm not into this. This is some bull.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to For Your Reference, brought to you by the Council on Library and Information Resources. I'm Robin.
I'm Paris.
And I'm Joshua, and I'll be paying for my own Netflix.
They have really locked stuff down hard. And honestly, I got to say, I'm surprised it took them so long to do it.
Your pirate days are over, my friend.
That eye patch was really cute, though. On as a separate question, though, do any of us know like when the words pirate and piracy were first used to describe stuff that didn't involve like swashbuckling and shoulder parrots?
I'm gonna go for not that long ago, but long ago.
I'm not sure, to be honest.
You don't know? Is it that time again? I think it might be.
It's time for Emergency Librarian.
Here to save us once again from talking in speculative circles about things we don't know anything about is Aaron Whitaker, our emergency librarian. So, Aaron, when and how, or you know, give us an idea of like how this term started to be used in ways that didn't involve actual, you know, seafaring awful people.
So it actually happened way earlier in the timeline of the usage of term that you would think it did. So the term actually is from the 12th century. It's from Greek. It means one who attacks or one who attempts, which I thought was kind of romantic. And then not too much later, in 1668, we get the first official record, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, of the word pirate, referring to someone not in a swashbuckling sense. And it was used actually for clandestine printers who would sort of steal plates from other printers and produce and redistribute works of others. So they were called land pirates in 1668. So it is pretty consistently for a long time been used to describe forms of intellectual property theft or copyright theft. In 1736, we get the term pirate used for the first time in an etymological dictionary, referring to plagiaries. So, been hundreds of years we've used it to refer to people not on the high seas. And then cut to 1913, which is, I think, sort of when we start using it in a technological sense. And that is when we started using it to describe unlicensed radio broadcasting.
Okay.
I always think I used to live really close to this park in Knoxville where the ham radio club would meet. And to this day, they do actually still raise like flags on their cars when they come and meet. Like each like ham radio personality, pirate, I don't know, has kind of their own flag that they raise. So I think that's pretty incredible, that legacy. And then, of course, we get to the 1980s. The piracy is theft slogan starts popping up. We start getting the FBI warnings on, previews in movie theaters and on.
I remember those vividly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. fast forward to even now, we have some modern day controversy about even using the term. So, like, are we really going to compare copyright infringement to like murdering and pillaging? So, sort of kind of like a, the term may have gotten away from us in a sense that is potentially harmful in terms of the degree of the crime. So that is a brief history of the word pirate. So 1668, 1913, 1980s, been using it for a long time to describe this kind of stuff.
All right, very cool. That is interesting information to know, and we're going to be talking more about such things in our next segment. Thank you again, Aaron, and it's time now for us to bring on our very special guest in Reviewer 2. Joining us for Reviewer 2 today is Dr. Lucas Logan, Associate Professor of Communication Studies at the University of Houston downtown. Welcome to the show, Lucas.
Thanks. Good to be here. That was an intense introduction with the flames.
Right? We like to be intense around here. So.
Oh, yeah. Can I throw one thing in about kind of interesting start of piracy stuff? Is in the 19th century, because I think this relates to a lot of the way people look at music piracy. Sheet music really took off. And the industry like absolutely hated it because people could print their own sheet music. And the British version of like the recording industry at the time would hire ex-cops and boxers to break into people's houses and just rip up their sheet music and break their pianos and all of this.
Wow.
So I feel like really fervent and actually a lot more physically violent back then. That's in a book by Adrian Johns titled Piracy from Gutenberg to Gates.
Wow. So who's really the violent ones here? I mean, you're gonna break somebody's piano because they have some sheet music. That's speaking of intense.
Yeah.
Just one more.
Go ahead.
Plagiarism in Spanish, like the older sense, literally means to hold somebody hostage.
Huh.
We have
I did not
feelings
know
about
that.
that.
Strong language.
Strong language. So, Lucas, before we start peppering you with questions, how about you tell us a little bit about you, your research as it relates to piracy and intellectual property?
Okay, most of my research now is more intermediary liability, but it is shifting back toward piracy for reasons we're going to talk about today. My dissertation was on piracy, mainly in the European Union, on the Pirate Bay and these BitTorrent sites. And I have several publications along those lines and dealing those issues with privacy. Yeah, also, again, it was focused on the European Union because that's where most of this stuff was coming from. The Pirate Bay, which versus Spotify really, and also A&M gave me a lot of money to go to Europe for doing that. So,
yeah, if you're a grad student, if you can find somebody to throw money at you to do research, that's where you go. But so you've been exploring things of intellectual property for I won't say how many years now. In intellectual property related regimes, do you see patterns across time as you think about the history and what's going on today?
One pattern we're seeing now that I think we may talk about is that the industry just kind of never learns the lesson. And that, I mean, we can go, if you go into the 80s, that this was the logo for a home taping is killing music when it was people recording on VHS and on cassettes. And the industry just really doubled down, tried to keep things like movie rentals from happening just stupidly, and all that happens. It's really good for the industry. Later on in the 90s, you get to the point where they entirely stop doing singles. They're charging you $20 for a Britney Spears CD and you only want Hit Me Baby One More Time. And the digital thing is sneaking up on them and they know it's sneaking up on them. And they think that they can just kind of technologically or legally get through it. And it doesn't happen. And of course, the industry crashes. You get that piracy kick up. Then you get kind of the equivalent of the British thing I was talking about, where they just start suing single mothers and everything for downloading 2 songs off of Napster and those kinds of things. Yeah. And then so that starts to die out, I guess, with streaming. But the lesson of streaming was supposed to be that everything could be affordable and easy, and you didn't have to worry about a bunch of viruses on your computer and all of this. But now all the streaming services are breaking apart. I can actually get basic cable with my internet plan for cheaper than I can all the subscriptions that I apply to or use other people's passwords for. And when you see these things like lockdowns on the passwords and all of that, you see that they're just not learning their lesson again. And you're probably going to see more innovations in piracy. And there has been an upsurge, and I'm seeing a lot more just kind of in the know of like the private sites and the really elite things starting to pop back. And it's just a matter of time before something like BitTorrent gets updated to the point that it's a little bit more secure. And all of this is just going to come full circle.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those things because like with the recording industry of America and like a lot of these quote unquote industries, right? So the recording industry of America was never about making music. It was about distributing media, or like the industry, what they were doing. The artists were the ones making the music, and the recording industry was always the one sitting sort of there in the middle, like, hey, if you want your music to get out to people, you have to come through us. But they never really figured out that that's where they need to live. Or that's where they do live, and how to position themselves as technology changes.
Yes, and they didn't realize what stopped everything, because the whole deal with the Spotify versus Pirate Bay thing, they're both out of Sweden. And the idea was always that the industry said you can't compete with free. So you had to have these big international Interpol raids, FBI raids, just arresting people, taking servers, locking people up because you couldn't compete with free. Spotify, I mean, you argue about that business model as you want, prove that you could compete with free if you just have a simple streaming service. And it did take Spotify years to get in the US because of legal hurdles. And so it proved that you can actually do this if you have something where you have the entire library. And something like Netflix was supposed to be the entire library, what they would call the black box. And then now you can barely get anything on Netflix. You've got Max, and anime or something, you do Crunchyroll, you have Shudder for horror, you have Hulu doing all of these things. One of the biggest criminal things about it to me is not having basic cable. Antennas are made so poorly now that I essentially have to pay or borrow my mother's DirecTV password to get public, basically Fox, NBC, things that are public goods that no one should have to pay for. And so like this is a problem in itself, that you can't even access the basic media that's supposed to be free. And it does seem like it's all going to lead up to just some kind of crash, because it doesn't seem sustainable, this stymied up.
Yeah. Lucas, I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about the present. Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence. So there are several challenges that have emerged with the use of AI, right? Can you talk about why it's imperative to have global regulations in regards to this?
There are a lot of reasons. It's top to bottom. We could go like really dark or just really just basic into copyright stuff. Like right now, I think there's a lot of pressure. If anyone's going to rein in AI, it's probably not going to be the United States government, but Adobe, Google, a lot of others are taking interest in it. But with Google, maybe not in the way you would like, and it depends on how you look at it. The main thing with that is you can just copy people's work. You're seeing the writer strike is a good example of that, where they fight with over AI and just replacing them with buttons and have a few editors to clean it up. And so that is something that could, damage livelihoods, and that also just like copying and distorted copyrighted works. What Google is doing now, I mean, I'm sure you guys talk all the time about how Google is basically useless as a search engine these days. And a lot of that now is because they are just putting up AI articles that are from just pieces of things other people have written, actual copyrighted stuff, and just jumbling it together, putting fake names of authors and all of this as your top searches. And so if you're looking at, misinformation or things like that, if those are issues that concern you, you have that issue there. The other thing that you have is just people making other people's likenesses. It's a Taylor Swift thing going on right now. And that is also a bigger issue in things like pornographic websites and, just things that can let you just, high school kids doing that with their teachers, and that kind of thing. And much, darker things there. So there has to be some kind of regulation on that. I don't see how you don't get there. As far as the copyright thing and all of that, I mean, I think a lot of commercials now, advertisements, I hear songs and I'm like, wait, is that one Panda Bear song or something? I'm like, no, that's not. That's something that sounds almost exactly like it. That was probably AI generated. And so that is, a threat to authors. And it does get to the point of, and in my opinion, the AI and the copyright, the problem is it does affect market value, which is a violation of copyright. Like it's undeniable. And so I think arguments that it's fair use for the purpose of flourishing knowledge or whatever to put copyrighted things through there or make things similar, I think it's just falls on its face. And It's just a matter of, how you're going to rein that in. And I mean, there's just like a myriad of questions there.
Yeah, so my question is semi-related to AI, but not exactly about AI. It's just the whole conversation around AI brought up this issue of who has to pay and who doesn't. And so the Association of Research Libraries, they put out a statement a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, that copyrightable works fall under fair use for training AI, right? So they can put them into training data for their models. But researchers in libraries or anybody has to request, pay, and sometimes just not get access to these things, right? Is there a contradiction in there between what research libraries are saying about what is fair use for these companies and not fair use for random general people trying to access them?
I'd say that's 100% a contradiction. Like, there's absolutely no way to justify that because it's, essentially the same thing. And I think it's just a bigger violation for the private companies to be doing that, because that is what's more affecting the market value than private people or researchers or those kinds of things. And so I think that is like a bigger problem there. And I think that is a problem with AI in general. Is it's a tool. It's like a hammer. It's really cool when it's building your deck. It really sucks when it's hitting you over the head. And it's something that in the hands of people who just want mass layoffs and just to not really have to deal with artists anymore, and to be able to just kind of take control over these things and just have these things run through very quickly and in their very own vested interest and not in the interest of just humanity or knowledge or anything in general. Then you're going to get, I think, just distorted viewpoints like that. And it's not good that, especially in the US, I mean, the Copyright Office is moving really slow on these kinds of things in general, and is really scared to kind of piss off their tech overlords. And it may be in other places, like there's probably more regulation going to come through the EU, for instance, before anywhere else. But it's something that really does not need to be completely market driven, because then it's going to be driven only for the market and shut everyone else out.
Do you, what do you think of the argument that these companies need to use these copyrightable machines? And this is the argument of the Association of Research Libraries. They need to use a copyrightable material because they're going to advance research. And if they don't, then we're not going to have as good research.
I mean, that depends on the research. And I mean, I would say like it doesn't really get too much with copyrighted stuff. It makes sense like in the medical field, with patents and those kinds of things, and using that to advance there. But you would have to really make the specific argument, like what kind of research are you just going to advance to get that through artificial intelligence? No, it seems to me that what you're going to do is just spill out a bunch of like articles and things that people have to pay for, and just kind of cut off the author there. I would have to look more at those specific arguments. I'm sure there's some that can be made, and I'm sure that from the right place and with the right initiative, it could. But just these to me aren't entities with a really strong history of like doing things with copyrighted material or other people's works just for the greater good and to expand knowledge. And also knowledge is always expanding anyway. Do we really want the AI to get there any faster? So
in your research, specifically in the chapter that we read, you refer to the information economy. First off, can you define that for our listeners? And then can you also kind of tell us how the average content creator is affected by the information economy? And when I say the average content creator, I just mean somebody who might sometimes make a video every blue moon about nonsense and post every now and again and engage with news through Facebook.
Okay, information economy, I guess broad term, maybe a little dated at this point, but no, just generally the idea of an economy that is built around simply like information, around copyrighted works, around media, content. It can include even like Instagram influencers, these kinds of things that are just purely informational, and also the software part of that too. So your computers, tablets, phones, all of this are all just part of that. And it's just an economy that's built around kind of the sharing and exchange of media and information. It affects, I mean, the most basic way with copyright and everything is, you put this on YouTube and someone has a Bob Dylan song in the background and it knocks it off. You have people that'll, not so much anymore, but, we're just getting sued for just, minor things with piracy. You have a crisis of very complex economic system that people just don't understand. So, how many times are you watching a video and they say, I don't make any money off of this copyrighted material, so blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that doesn't mean anything. And people don't really know what they're often getting into. They don't really kind of know the limits of what they can be doing or should be doing. And additionally, the problem with things like anything like Zuck-based or Elon-based or whatever is you have kind of these algorithms that are controlling what pops up. And so because that's all algorithmically done, they're going to err on the side of caution. And so a lot of things, like I know music artists, that they get their stuff knocked out. It's like their material that they own, but someone will just put in the copyright complaint. It can take months to get it back, and those kinds of things. So it's like constantly bumping up against that. And really the only way that this stuff gets regulated is through those algorithms, which can be highly erroneous and can also end up just causing all kinds of chaos with with politics and things like just fake news and censorship and so forth. But like everyone is just, I think, intimately involved, at least like in the United States and Europe, with the information economy, like wholly. And it's all part of what we're involved in day to day.
So I want to ask you a little bit about the Communications Decency Act. I know you're very familiar with this, and specifically Section 230. And Section 230, I'd love to hear you talk some more about how that's both a good and a bad thing. You mentioned Taylor Swift earlier, and I think that's where I start thinking about this Section 230 really is the basis for a free and open internet.
Yeah.
And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, but it also does leave people like Taylor Swift vulnerable to stuff like deep fake porn of her being spread around Twitter or X or whatever Elon's plaything is called today.
Okay, so Section 230, it's the safe harbor law in the U.S. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, Public Knowledge, all of them still hail it as a very weird thing for the U.S., like the best sort of liability laws in the world, best set, that it is actually extremely helpful, and that it keeps, like I was saying, more things from being knocked out by Zuckerberg or whatever, because it allows a greater amount of time for things to kind of get censored and taken down, and it removes liability from the company. So it removes liability from Facebook or something like that. It is hated. I think the Biden administration went in wanting to get rid of it because of the proliferation of fake news and these kinds of things, making it harder to stop Russian disinformation, all of that. The right hates it for some weirder reason. They think it's like they think it's an act that just allows them just to be censored all the time for no reason. And like it's really kind of convoluted, but everything they do with, like we're silenced and shadow banned and all of that has to do with Section 230. So there is kind of a bipartisan move against it, but at the same time, it's, nothing's really getting done. With the Taylor Swift stuff, like if you go back to a lot of that though, a lot of that stuff doesn't fall under civil suits. And so it kind of goes out the window there. If this is criminal action, like if it gets determined, because I think the other example the Scarlett Johansson example from a few years ago, those were phone leaks of a lot of other Kate Upton and everything. The FBI went off on that on criminal charges, saying that this was illegal stuff. The same way with Section 230 doesn't really apply to a lot of copyrightable things because that's considered straight up theft. And so it is something that can be worked around. I'd say it's better than anything that anyone else is proposing. But I mean, it is from 1996. It's just an entirely different world of internet, and we've put a lot of.
Are you saying technology has advanced since 1996?
Yeah, a little bit. It's kind of hard to put that toothpaste back in the tube at this point with a lot of it. But in general, I would say it'd probably be very just dangerous and even more just kind of damaging to the internet to take out CDA right now, because the safe harbors do allow you to put a lot of things up there. They allow you to have a lot more kind of freedom of speech online, and they keep these companies and these algorithms from getting really, really strict and just wiping everything out. And even if you look at Europe and the EU, where they don't really have those laws, you have a lot harsher kind of EU directives that people are always just protesting and freaking out about due to just these really harsh algorithms that would just initially just knock everything out, legal streams, your own videos and all of that, just to make sure that they're not violating any law, because they're scared to do so and they're watching their back and not yours.
Cool. So I think we have time for one more question. I'll ask, if you don't mind, Joshua and Paris. And so Microsoft and OpenAI in particular have been hit with copyright infringement lawsuits recently. New York Times and some individual authors, for basically taking their content and using it to feed their machine, so to speak. So what do you predict is going to be the outcome there, if you had to guess?
It's really difficult right now. Yeah, it's starting to look like there is, just from what I'm seeing, just kind of a public outpouring, and maybe even just a public outpouring, but from a lot of media companies and everything, that there is an effort to maybe kind of shut this down right now, and that some of these lawsuits might stick. I would think that they should, but you just never bet against Google. They defeated Viacom. They beat everyone. They've got those lawyers. So it's hard to tell how that will go. A lot of that is just going to come down to that. But in general, you're going to see just more and more of it, and it's not a good look. And I really don't know how you can restrain it, especially as this stuff just is moving so fast, and it's going to get harder and harder to pinpoint the technology and what happened, and how you can mimic people's voices and change things and modify the character of use. I mean, there's one AI thing that a friend of mine uses. It's called Poe, I think. And what it does is, it's like if you're plagiarizing a paper or whatever, it will look at your past papers, things you've written, and modify the plagiarism into your voice. And so,
wow,
wow,
it's harder to turn it in, or one of these plagiarism systems to find.
So I could steal stuff from Joshua, and it would make it sound more like me.
It would write it in your voice. And
good to know.
Go on.
There's a lot of challenges with that, and so these early lawsuits, it's hard to tell. Kind of just like the early like music piracy lawsuits and those kinds of things, where the technology changes, and all of a sudden it's a whole new set of affairs in the courtroom. But these early lawsuits, it might stick. We'll see.
All right. Well, I wish we could stay and talk all night, but that's the time we have for today. Thank you, Lucas, for joining us. Right. And now it is once again time for Paris and Joshua to help us navigate the wild world of media in Check This Out.
Hello, everyone. Here again, the Check This Out segment, where we're going to delve into the dynamic world of information literacy, where knowledge meets the digital age. I'm Paris Whalen, and this is Joshua Ortiz-Baco. And this time, we're going to be exploring the intersection of intellectual property rights, information literacy, and you, or at least what that has to do with you. So grab your headphones and tune in for free as of now, and let's unravel the layers of information literacy together, okay? So earlier, we were just having this great discussion with Lucas Logan about intellectual property and the laws, or the rules that shape how individuals access, use, and share intellectual creations. Now, as members of educational institutions, we have a unique role in that GLAM institutions, which is galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, share this mission of providing equitable access to knowledge. This is why libraries and other educational institutions are able to really share resources like newspapers, like the Wall Street Journal that requires a subscription, movies, and even like unique collections like games with their users.
Yeah, this was crazy to me. I don't know if you remember having this experience. In my head, libraries were about books. And if it wasn't in the library, it didn't exist. There was no way of getting it. Until you talk to a librarian and find out, oh, you guys can request things, like books come from other places. If you haven't experienced that yet, it's not just books. The library can get access to newspapers, magazines. You can even find and stream titles and TV shows through your library, which we're going to be talking about a little bit today. So even though for us, getting movies and books might feel like the same thing when we're at the library, content providers and the legal system do not treat them as if they were the same thing. So if you're lucky, you walking over to your library, you ask them for a title, and they'll have an agreement with the streaming companies that have the copyrighted material that you're looking for. Or they can help you find other legal and free streaming titles, right? And we have a list put together of some examples where you might be able to find these, and it includes a lot of documentaries, a lot of educational films, as well as historical films. Now, what happens if you can't find them there and your library doesn't have an agreement with the streaming company? You might think, hey, I subscribe to that company with a big red letter N, or maybe to that company that rhymes with King Chaka Sulu. Does that mean I can stream a movie for my class, my community, my event? Turns out, no, you can't.
Yeah.
The majority of streaming services do not provide educational licenses. So in other kind of streaming collections, in academic streaming collections, there'll be an educational license so that you can use it for your classroom, you can use it for an event. And you might be asking yourself, when did I agree to not have the use for this? When did I agree to only use this when I was in my house? Well, it turns out when you clicked on agree terms, just like the rest of us, you skipped over the section. And just for reference, this is what it looks like from the terms of use for the big red letter N service. They say, their service and any content accessed through our service are for your personal and non-commercial use only. It may not be shared with individuals beyond your household. You agree not to use the service for public performances. This is different, right? We're used to buying, some of us are used to buying the DVD or you buy the file, right? So when you have that, you're not streaming it, and you have the rights to actually show this movie, show this title. When you're streaming, what happens is license agreements override copyright or fair use. So that little box that you ticked means more in those cases when you're streaming than the legal system. Now, in the cases when the library doesn't have an agreement in place, what we have to do is request, and more than often, we have to pay for a one-time educational screening or for an individual film's public performance rights. Yeah. Even though we buy this, there's still a bunch of restrictions, and so you really want to get with your local librarian to help you guide through these requirements so you stay on the right side of the law. And trust us, just like we were discussing before, these companies are watching out for this. Do not get caught doing shady stuff.
Yeah, do not get caught up. So for our listeners, this explains a few things that you may have actually experienced. So like why you can't use streaming services with accessories like projectors unless you specifically have an HDMI port. So if you ran into the black screen or it wouldn't even show up on your sheet that's hanging from a wall, that's probably what was going on. Another example is the screen mirroring or that sharing feature in video conferencing software like Zoom or something, which will basically black out the window in use if you try to record or mirror that video content. This all has to do with digital rights and concern with monitoring the sharing and intellectual property or content. So coming full circle with this and bringing it back to your point about public performance rights and education, I actually had this dilemma with an instructor who wanted to show films a couple of weeks ago. And the issues that we ran into with their request was not only that the class was larger than the watch party feature would allow on most platforms, but that instructor was also teaching in an online course using video conference software. So while, fair use for educational purposes was in play here, we were dealing with third-party sources, and there were still issues with access because of digital rights and piracy prevention tactics, such as that digital rights management, which blacks out the screen.
Yeah. So you might be wondering at this point, how do I stay out of hot water and dodge legal pitfalls? Well, you guessed it. You're going to break out those information literacy skills and probably some media literacy skills as well.
Yeah. So it's helpful, as y'all know, to start out with working vocabulary that can really lead to reputable sources, including, your scholarly publications, maybe some educational videos, but also within there, there's going to be some evidence and opinion-based thought leaders. So just be aware of that. So these are just some terms that you can use to explore that complexity of intellectual property rights from a perspective perhaps that is relevant to you. So of course, you see the different types of intellectual properties like copyright and trademark on this list, but there's also terms like Creative Commons, which you might not be familiar with. Creative Commons is basically a type of license that allows creators to specify the permissions for their work and how it's used. So think like taggings, like we mentioned earlier with social media, or, old school like citations in a paper. Another word that another couple words you might not be familiar with is open source, which is incredibly important to GLAM, so that's your galleries, libraries, archives, and museums, institutions due to budget constraints and various other reasons. Now, open source is software or code made freely available to the public to view, modify, and share, which basically encourages community participation and innovation without restrictive licensing. A couple examples of this might be the web browser, Mozilla Firefox, and LibreOffice, which is an alternative to commercial counterparts that have access barriers like paywalls.
And a related term that often gets confused, so we confuse open source with open access, but there are some really important distinctions between the two. When we talk about open access, we're generally referring to published works. We're often referring to peer review research, images, and more now, we're talking about data. Open access can also refer to digital collections that can be used freely. So the Smithsonian has an image collection that's open access. The Library of Congress has an open access ebook collection, both that I recommend a ton. When we refer to open access publishing, we are usually referring to publishing models that don't ask you, the reader, to pay to get access. Instead, the money, because as we all know, there's no such thing as a free lunch, comes from authors or institutions or other funding sources. Yeah. The world of open access is constantly growing, thankfully, as more people recognize the value of making it easier to access cultural heritage, information, and research. But again, your local librarian will be the hero that can point you in the right direction of journals, publishers, and other sources of open access materials.
Yeah, thank you for making that distinction. So naturally, as y'all build out your vocabulary on a subject, you're accumulating this information that you have to sort through, and you're going to start having a lot of questions about it. So these are some questions that may surface as you kind of absorb this information through different modalities. So whether it be the videos or, articles that you read into, this is basically going to lead us to engage with the process of media literacy. So some questions that may show up might be, what steps should I take to properly attribute the source when using materials from the institution's collection? So this might be you trying to cite something from your special collections at your university library. Another one is, how can I determine the copyright status of a particular work or a piece of information? So maybe you want to use a particular song on the beginning of your podcast, but there are restrictions about what songs you can use, how long how long the clip is that you can use. You need to be aware of those types of things. Another question you might use or might ask will be, how can I incorporate these third-party content into my media creations while respecting copyright laws? So if you wanted to use a music video for whatever reason and your video cast like this, you're going to have questions around that and how much of that you can use, just like the song. So you probably need to ask somebody like a librarian. But these are just a few of the questions that may require more time and context to really get the full picture of your copyright in this particular situations.
And those are fantastic questions. Some of those I didn't know about, to be honest. So as you are going through those questions and exploring reputable sources, there are some practical measures and actions that you can take to navigate this really complex intellectual property use in your stuff, right? And we have some suggested resources you can check out to expand your knowledge. There's also a few things you can do to engage with this topic. So the first, support open access and Creative Commons resources using openly licensed content, which allows for greater flexibility in sharing and modification. So here you have institutions, organizations, and projects that support this. Attribute and seek permissions. So that's how you make sure to respect the creators and that their content is associated with their names, right? Cite them. Ask for permission. Sometimes it's just a matter of sending out an email. And this fosters a culture of ethical use and collaboration. Understand copyright basics. We've been giving you an introduction to some of these in the conversation with Logan. But at the end of the day, you are responsible for the content that you create. So you need to understand those basics so that you can make informed decisions about using and sharing creative works while staying within the legal and ethical boundaries. Right?
Yes. Thank you so much for going over a few options for our listeners. So diving into this world of intellectual property, it really shows us how to balance creativity and the law. And GLAM institutions are fierce defenders of this First Amendment, which includes equitable access to information, which we talked about earlier. So we are committed to providing spaces and resources that are relevant to our users by removing these barriers that prevent you from exploring and engaging with the cultural heritage, knowledge, and information. So we just want y'all to be aware of what we do on the regular.
Yeah. This has been awesome, like always. I wish we could keep going because there is so much to talk about in this area. But I'll leave you with a simple request. Please use, share, and create content responsibly. This is our digital world. We need to maintain it. Brush up on regulations and credit where credit's due. Citations, tags, and proper attribution styles. Thanks for staying tuned to check this out, and we'll catch you next time.
All right. So always I have to jump in at the end, right? But something y'all made me think about though is some advice I would want to throw out to people too. In this information economy we're living in, we are often also content creators. So think about how you can, use Creative Commons licenses on your own work so that you can really sort of be part of that community of sharing out there. So anyway, thank you both as always. It's always fun to do this with y'all, and we'll all see you next time.